What is up, Packers fans, and welcome back to the Daily Draft brought to you by Badger State Brewing. So excited today to be joined by Sam Monson. Um, Sam's no stranger to the channel whatsoever. Sam is the PFF lead NFL analyst and the co-host of the PFF NFL show. This guy, the very tall Steve Palazzolo. Sam, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Not too terribly bad. Sam does was a weekly deal with Andy Herman on the Pack a Day podcast that you had kind of stopped in.
Yeah, through the season we were doing a weekly thing there.
Right on. So I want to just kind of ask you what your kind of process is with the draft, because I try to explain to people, like, I publish Packer Report. So I cover the Green Bay Packers during the season. It means I'm not watching 40 hours a week of college tape. And you cover the NFL, you cover the National Football League for 18 regular season weeks and then into the playoffs. So just so people, and by the way, our guy Trevor Sickman does an unbelievable job, and Mike Renner did before him. But what's kind of your process like? When do you actually get time to kind of dive in?
Yeah, usually it really is after the NFL season finishes. This year was a little bit different. We had Trevor on the show for Tuesdays during the season, so kind of got an early start on some of the top prospects. I would kind of ask Trevor, okay, well, this week we're going to talk about the quarterbacks, in the upcoming draft, sort of from a distance. So give me, the top 5 guys to go and have a little look at, and I'll go watch some tape, and we'll sort of talk about what the top quarterback prospects look like in the upcoming draft. And we kind of did that position by position throughout the season. So I had at least a first look at a lot of these guys at the top end. But then, once the NFL season finishes, that's when me and Steve get a chance to kind of go in and really start watching draft tape and watching these guys properly to get a full look at the entire draft class. So we're coming at this with fresh eyes, once the NFL season is finished, and then doing all of our draft prep at that point.
Gotcha. Yeah, just always good to get kind of, because obviously, I have a chance to talk to folks that it's their profession, 365 days a year. It's what they do. Then I've got guys like my buddy Owen Reese, who I love talking offensive line with, but he is literally a college football coach. So he has other stuff, and it's just fun to get the perspective of the guys that live, eat, and breathe it, and then the guys that take it really seriously too, but like I said, have other stuff going on. So I listened to a snippet from you and Sam the other day talking about Green Bay's shotgun approach, and it has been something that they've done for a very long time. Prior to 2019, they signed Adrian Amos and drafted Darnell Savage Jr. They signed Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith and drafted Rashawn Gary. But they do it even within the NFL draft, as you mentioned, both in 2022 and in 2023. Brian Gutekunst select 3 wide receivers. He used 2 top 100 picks on tight ends last year. And then this year, drafting 3 offensive linemen and 3 safeties to go along with 2 linebackers. You mentioned this as something you feel like is a smart approach. And I'm not necessarily here to disagree, but I would like to have you just kind of speak to people about like batting averages and how taking 3 swings is smarter than taking 1, and just kind of why you appreciate it as a concept.
Yeah, I mean, when you start listening to analytics and start looking at all the data surrounding these things, you kind of come to the conclusion pretty quickly that everybody is bad at drafting, right? And nobody is much better at drafting than anybody else. So a lot of these ideas of, do you trade up, do you trade down, how do you pick need? Like, all of the sort of basic tenets of drafting tend to boil down to the idea that ultimately everybody's kind of bad, and you just have to try and play the percentages as best you can. So, you don't want to go into a draft with a glaring need that you need to fill, because most teams aren't good at doing that. So if you need to go, oh man, we need a starting left tackle, in the first round. Now you need to nail that pick, because that guy's got to be starting week 1, and you've penciled him in as a need that needs to be filled. Ideally, what you want to do is run into the draft without any glaring needs, and you can just pick what you think are the best player available. But I think that that's not reality sometimes. You're going to be in a position where you just couldn't solve a particular spot in free agency, or a guy left that you wanted to keep on board, or whatever it is, and you have a need that needs to be filled, and the draft is upcoming. So another way of mitigating that is to say, okay, well, if we can't rely on the one player we're drafting being really good, let's try and diversify the risk. Let's try and spread it out. Put a couple of eggs in several baskets instead of all the eggs in one basket. And I think the Packers have this really smart approach where they say we are going to draft in volume, and we're going to draft multiple times at any position that we need to have an impact in year one. And they've done it for years. Like, they've done it pretty consistently. They talk about it pretty openly in terms of how many draft picks they want. And I just think it's a really smart way of approaching the draft, because in any given year, it might not be the guy you thought it was who was going to be the really good one. You draft a wide receiver in the first round, you draft one in the third, you draft one in the sixth. The guy in the sixth round might end up being the best player. We don't know. We don't think he will, and there's a better chance that the first rounder will be a better player. But the draft is the nature of the draft is you never know. So spreading that risk, taking multiple shots, I think is always a smart way of doing it. And creating that many swings of the bat, I think, is just a good way of operating.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something where, when I do like a Packers mock draft, and I think a lot of people get into this habit, and it's understandable, but you take and try to address each need in each round. And you end up like taking, a tackle. Okay, well, then I better hit corner, and then I better hit. All right, well, we haven't taken the safety yet. And oh my gosh, they do need a linebacker. So now in round 4, you're taking a linebacker, and Green Bay just has not done business that way. Now, they had enough extra picks due to the Douglas trade and due to the Rodgers trade that they still were able to address other positions. But it is almost becoming, not almost, I mean, it just is a trend. I mean, I think you have to um, get back to it. The last kind of philosophy that I want to ask you about before we sort of dive into this class is, Ron Wolf and Ted Thompson didn't do it as much, although he had his success stories with, like Matt Flynn getting that deal from the Seahawks and stuff like that. But Ron Wolf always wanted to take a quarterback. Um, Green Bay shocked you, I know. I mean, I listened to the show after last year's draft, shocked me by taking Sean Clifford. He actually played pretty well in preseason and looks competent.
Yeah.
And then immediately backed that up by taking Michael Pratt. Now, we felt like Michael Pratt was a, mid-round type player, or I did at least, and they got him really late. But your thoughts on the Pratt pick, and then just generally like loading up on QBs, or why would you take one every year? What is the idea behind that?
I mean, I think quarterback obviously is the most valuable position in the game, and really the most valuable thing is a good quarterback on a rookie contract. And the lower down that guy is drafted, the more valuable that contract is. Like, the best value contract in football right now is Brock Purdy, because he was literally the last pick of the draft. If Brock Purdy had been an undrafted rookie, he would be on a better contract than he's on right now from his point of view. So the 49ers literally have the single best value contract in all of the NFL. So I think if you're able to find a guy that is just a better player than you thought he was, or that everybody thought he was, at quarterback, the second he's on that contract, you just have an absolute cheat code when it comes to roster construction and roster management. So I think it's always worth, particularly for a team that's drafting a lot, the team that wants to draft sort of 10 to 15 times in a draft, as opposed to the guys that skate by on 5, 6, 7 draft picks every year. If you're going to have more picks than everybody else anyway, I would definitely always take a swing at a quarterback, low down the draft, who you think has that talent. Because if he shows up and he's just a way better player than people thought he was, it's incredibly valuable. So I think there's definitely merit to just keep swinging and seeing if you stumble into one of those guys every now and again.
Okay, just kind of your high level thoughts on this draft. I know we've already discussed sort of the shotgun approach, but um, I think it's hard to, even taking like the green and gold glasses off, I think it's hard to be anything other than impressed with the 2022 and 2023 classes after some not so great stuff. Um, so from just kind of a high level, your thought on where he being Brian Gutekunst kind of landed this one. I felt like this was a sort of a B plus type of situation. I don't like draft guides, but Thought they're trying to hit a lot more singles and doubles than maybe some of the like crazy high level swings that they took and appear to have connected on at least a number of them in 2022 and 2023.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it's, there were a lot of really, really good drafts this year. This one didn't strike me as like mind blowing, but I think it was a good, solid draft. Even independent of the thing we talked about, the shotgun approach or double dipping at multiple positions. I think they got some good players, some guys that I liked, some guys that obviously do fit needs, and then they did bolster that the chance of those guys being good by having a contingency plan and those insurance policies. So Jordan Morgan was somebody that, you know, was seen as a reach by some people. I know a lot of people wanted the Packers to grab Graham Barton at that spot, the Duke offensive lineman. I think Morgan is more of a Packers type of player. I think they like a guy that has sort of tackle ability that could potentially play inside as opposed to an interior player that could potentially play outside at a pinch. I think he makes sense from Green Bay's point of view. And that second wave of offensive tackle was always going to be a little bit beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's sort of like which flavor was your thing. It was always going to be a little bit random which guy went next and what the order was going to be. Edgerrin Cooper is most people's linebacker one, the top linebacker in this class. Grading profile is amazing. He was good at everything last year. He's got the athleticism. He's got the size. He could definitely be a real impact player for them. I think Javon Bullard, the safety from Georgia, is a really good player as well. I think Georgia used him right last year as well. They had him in this role that was sort of a hybrid slot defender, but robber safety guy that kind of plays in the half space. Perfect. I would watch Georgia tape and I would copy that exactly if I was Green Bay. Like that's the role I would want him in next to Xavier McKinney. And then Marshawn Lloyd in particular as the next pick. I think he's a really good running back. Like he is so good in the open space. If you can get him room, he can make things happen. Now it's going to be harder to find that space in the NFL than it was at USC and Lincoln Riley's offense. But as a complementary changeup, I think he's a really good back as well.
Yeah, to me, Lloyd was very similar. I think the running back conversation in this year's class was very similar to what you were talking about after the Alt Fashanu line at Otako. What do you need? Do you
Right.
need what like a Will Shipley brings, or do you need what an Audric Estime brings? Do you need the Jets took two big backs? What do you need? And the Packers with kind of the I don't know that I would call Josh Jacobs slower, but like Dylan's not super explosive. They had no home run swing out of the running back position. They went and got their home run swing. The biggest head scratcher to me in this class, and I think honestly probably to consensus, especially when you consider the value of a top 91 pick, was Missouri's Tyron Hopper. Played a little bit at Florida, transferred to Mizzou. One thing I needed to understand and just didn't get time to because I had such a low initial grade on him, I didn't get back to him, was apparently he's kind of the Jordan Love, Dontavion Wicks flavor, where his second to last year in college was much better than his last. Kalen King, who they also took, is in the exact same
Yeah.
boat. What was on Hopper's 2022 tape that was from PFF's grading standpoint, like 30 points higher in overall defensive grade? I think he was around 80, and I think 2023 was around 50.
Yeah, it was a big, significant difference between the two. Just more productive across the board. Like I think sometimes a linebacker in particular, really anywhere in the back seven, I think the is extremely volatile year to year. In this day and age, like it has become so difficult to play those positions because offenses have gotten so good at attacking those spots and putting these guys in conflict. So linebacker, I think you're seeing a ton of volatility year to year in terms of performance, in terms of grading. And to an extent, it's inevitable. And I think generally those kind of guys that are really good the previous year and not good coming into their final year coming out, I think that just teams don't know what to do with that yet. And I don't know what to do with that yet. Like it's an uncomfortable, you like the nice pattern, right? The guy gets better every single year. It's like, he's developing. It's perfect. This is what we like to see. Sometimes it doesn't work like that. And guys are better the year before and they come into the NFL off a down year. And I think teams still don't quite have a great handle on exactly how to approach those players. So I think to a degree, there's an element that says you could buy low on those guys and put it down to just the the volatility of the position and the nature of football, that those you're going to get those changes every year. And I think certainly with a guy like Kalen King in the seventh, like that's a gamble to take every single day. Like we saw way better play from him the year before.
Yeah.
And he's, his stock got absolutely destroyed by his final season. I would take a gamble on a guy like that late in the draft every single time. Hopper, it's a little bit different. And I think it was more of a reach for him, but you can at least look to the year before and say there's a better player in there than there was this season.
Fair enough. Uh, your take on the two mid-round safeties, and if you particularly liked one. I know there were some real differences in consensus, and certainly like where I had Oladapo, where other people had Oladapo. Some people really like Evan Williams. In fact, Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl basically said he knew of a number of teams that were eyeing him in round 4. Consensus wasn't that way. I wasn't that way. Did you have a one of the two young gentlemen from Oregon? Did you or the state of Oregon? Did you have a take on either one of those two safeties?
No, not a really strong one. I thought that Bullard was by far and away the best player they've taken at that safety position. But this is the nature of the game, right? I didn't think that Dontavian Wicks would be the guy that sort of really stood out from last year's draft class or group of receivers either. So we'll see, I guess, if either one of those guys proves to be more than just a contingency or an insurance policy. But to me, Bullard was the standout, and those other two guys, I think, are much lower chances of success.
Anyone else or anything else kind of stick out from you from this class? Is an 11-player class. We kind of mentioned how Hopper was a little bit of a head scratcher. Anything else that stood out to you is like, oh, that's really interesting, or man, I can't believe they did that?
No, I mean, we covered this already, but I think the Michael Pratt selection was not just good value in terms of let's take a quarterback because if we hit, it's a good thing. But also, I think at that point in the draft, Michael Pratt was just a value selection. Like he was somebody that was supposed to go somewhere higher than that. It was a lot of people's. Spencer Rattler was kind of everybody's favorite quarterback once those top guys had gone off the board, however many we thought there would be. Spencer Rattler was QB7, but I think most people would have had Pratt as the next guy available. And to get him right at the bottom of the draft and as low as they did, I think was just value at that stage. Like he's got a lot of really nice touch passes on his tape, some really impressive plays. So yeah, take a swing. And he might not make it out of training camp, but it's worth having a look.
Absolutely. All right, Sam, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate having you on a lot.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.